My presentation's around building your own CLI coding agent with Pydantic AI. So there's a lot of code in this presentation. The interesting thing is because we're using a large number of MCP servers, actually you can do the same here with Claude Code, with Claude Desktop, and actually just add these MCP servers manually and actually get a very similar outcome. So while I did initially think this was 100% focused on uh, engineers, actually this is something that can be done by everyone. Cool. So about me, I'm a principal AI engineer. Been with ThoughtWorks a year, working on building generative AI platforms for one of our large automotive customers. So been working with LLMs and generative AI for 4 or 5 years now. Before that was data, machine learning, and software engineering. So yeah, that's me. So I did have a bunch of funny transitions on this slide, but I got rid of them because I'm crap at slides. But actually, locally, recently, we've seen a lot of these CLI coding agents, Claude Code being the sort of first one. But then you've got Gemini, Open Code. On the bottom left, you've got Simon Wilson's LLM CLI, probably actually really before Claude Code, but it was not with these agentic pieces. In the middle, you've got Toad, Ada as well, actually, to be fair, also before Claude Code. So yeah, these basically a sort of more simplified way of interacting with large language models and giving them some sort of agentic loop. So if we're talking around the directed acyclic graph, an agent kind of breaks that in that it can be cyclic, like, which is powerful, but also less predictable. So yeah, it's sort of one of those with great power comes great responsibility, and frequently, yeah, this is why these things need some supervision and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, why build when you can buy? For me, I think a big part of it is learning. Really want to demystify what's going on under the hood with these things. There's also an opportunity to learn a bunch of different technologies doing this, and I hopefully show that the code really isn't that much. These things aren't that deep. They shouldn't be too complex, and you should be able to understand a little bit more around what's going on and why they fail in particular ways, etc. So the technologies I'm using, Pydantic AI and their agents implementation. We're going to look at tool calling, so how to do that, which is sort of relatively simple. You've then got model context protocol, excellently introduced by Amy before me, and then a CLI interface so that you can sort of bring it all together and yeah, get going. So starting really, really simply, yeah, this is kind of all you need to get going to have a CLI agent. This is using a couple of tools for Python. So UV-init is a package manager effectively. UV-add Pydantic AI, that's the library we're using. Ollama is a local model provider. So you can basically download Ollama. It's OpenAI API compatible. So all you do is use the OpenAI provider, provide it your local host URL. I was playing around with this earlier, and don't put HTTPS like unless you've set up Ollama for that. I was very confused as to why I wasn't able to get it, but specify the model. With Ollama, you just go Ollama run, and then the name of the model, it will download it. This is a 32 billion model, so it takes a while to download, but you can do that before. We create an agent by initializing the agent class and passing it the model. And then we just say agent to CLI. That's kind of it. Yeah, we can then just drop out and go uv run main.py, and that will run the CLI with everything installed. And yeah, you can then start having a chat to an LLM, and it's got some sort of agentic loop. So it doesn't have to just immediately answer. It can think about things and go off and do stuff. So this is pretty straightforward, basic. There's not many things that it can do apart from what you do immediately, but you kind of basically have that ChatGPT interface in your terminal. So one of the things that's really useful is straight away adding a bit of local observability. So Pydantic AI, great in terms of local observability, in terms of open telemetry. So you can get going with that straight away. For this, I wanted a completely local setup that everyone could do, like without having access to any cloud infrastructure or anything. Again, you can do this with, other open telemetry observability platforms, but this OTel TUI terminal user interface is super straightforward, super simple, and all you have to do is use Logfire, also built by Pydantic, to instrument Pydantic AI, capture all of the spans, and we do this just before we've got this ability to run the main function. Only difference from the one above is we're now using async as well, because we need that in the future for MCP. So what does that look like? Well, in the terminal user interface, you actually see these spans and traces, where in this example, it's going to Gemini. Again, later example, I can show you what I've done to work with Gemini. We can obviously get API keys for Gemini, and passing that is basically just replacing the Ollama model. But here we can see sort of attributes like the agent name, GenAI usage. If you go down and select the tools, you can see the name of the tools and things like that. So this is really cool in terms of just like, yeah, I'll show it later, but you could basically just have something running like in a couple of terminals and play around with it, see what it does. And the reason this is really important, as we saw from even the MCP piece last time, these things can get complicated quickly, go down different rabbit holes, and you want to be able to see what's going on and where's it's going. And this distributed tracing out of the box is really, really powerful for debugging and understanding what's going on. So straight away, we have a working CLI and a way to observe it, which is pretty cool. So next, I want to give it some feedback. I'm going to maybe ask it about some code, but yeah, I want to be able to get feedback from running the tests. So this is a really, really simple way of adding in some tools. Again, we've just got this decorator. We've got the agent from before. Tool plain is just a tool that doesn't take any input. So LLMs can provide input. Plain tools are much more simple and straightforward. Subprocess, this is basically just running another terminal command. And you can see here the code in Python. We're just doing PyTest. We're giving it some verbosity and a couple of other things and telling it where to go, capturing the output, returning it as text, and returning the result. So this return doesn't return to us, it returns to the agent. And so when the agent runs this tool, it will run this CLI command behind the scenes, capture the output, and now it's got a feedback loop of, is it doing the right thing? So instead of just copying and pasting, we've now got that relevant context about any issues that might exist in our code base. Another good example of another tool plane that could be easy is just looking at a commit message. So I'm guilty of making crap commit messages quite frequently. So having something that could just pass the git diff with the staged as context. And now here we're just making it slightly more complex by adding a prompt. We're able to say, here's the, here's where we'll put the diff, and you can edit it a little bit. So now I can get custom commit messages, which is pretty good. Moving on, those of you who saw Moritz's talk yesterday will see actually there's a whole like tuning part of this process where actually it's really useful to have some sensible defaults, put them in and make sure that you've got something so that you're not just getting default behavior out of the box. We wanted to teach the sort of agent a bit more around like how we want to do our best practices, code changes, test failures, etc. This was really important because when I gave the agent test failures, it was like, oh, that's great. Let me just delete that text or a test, or let me just change the test. Then now the test passes. It's like, no, that's not what I want. The test I wrote, it's good. I want you to fix the test in the implementation. So yeah, very much. Some of these sorts of things. This is a very simple, generic one. I think Moritz's talk was much better on that. So if you didn't catch it yesterday, yeah, go and do a bit of research. So luckily, I don't need to talk too much about MCP, but the idea here is it's really plug and play. So the really cool thing about MCP is that, as Amy demonstrated, you can just plug this into Claude Desktop, right? But actually, with our CLI, we've built an MCP host, an MCP client. So we can literally interact in exactly the same way, and it's just plug and play. And they call it this sort of USB-C port for AI applications, which, yeah, kind of makes sense. So first thing that we want to add here is the ability to run Python code. Now, running Python code arbitrarily probably isn't a good idea. So Pydantic AI have created this MCP server that can run Python in complete isolation. So in fact, you can see it uses Deno and spins up a complete sort of non-Python environment to run Python in, if that makes any sense, using Zoxide, sort of, so you've completely sandboxed it. This is super useful because LLMs, you know, it's like count how many R's there are in strawberry is the classic problem. You know, that sort of thing is very difficult for autocomplete on steroids to do, but you can write code for it very simply, and now you get a much more consistent outcome. So yeah, one key thing here as well is it's all local, so you can do MCP over HTTP, etc. But rather than having to spin up all these different services, we just allow the sort of like Pydantic AI to handle spinning up all of these servers in processes using standard in and standard out. So really, really simple. Yeah, so we can keep going. This is context 7. So most LLMs are trained on historic data. In fact, that's you can't train on future data. That would be amazing. But there's a cutoff date. And often if you ask them just naively to look at documentation, they will have outdated versions of things. So context 7 is basically markdown docs. So much more simple, strips out all the HTML, shorter context, but also like up-to-date documentation from hundreds, thousands of libraries, not just Python, but everything. They've got an MCP server. I add context 7, and suddenly I have access to up-to-date documentation that's LLM readable. Perfect. AWS, so really only just scratching the surface here. But the context I'm in, we're on AWS. AWS has 52 MCPs already. So think of that as like they basically have one per product, and these have access to. So the ones I've chosen here are just the core one and the documentation server, so that I've got the sort of again up-to-date documentation here on AWS, and I can ask questions about that. Lambdas, IAM policies, any cloud things I've got, nice and simple. And again, reminder that this can go straight into Claude Desktop if you really want. You know, slightly different JSON rather than this Python, but very simple. And I'd encourage people, if they're on AWS, to have a look through these servers, not just from the fact that you can plug and play really quickly and get some powerful um, abilities like to look at CloudWatch logs and metrics, or to like actually look into your EKS cluster, things like that. Again, all done with sort of AWS's sensible defaults. I'm pretty certain all of them are read-only. So, you should be relatively comfortable that they're not going to break too many things. But again, definitely look at them. But the other thing is that they're also a great example of a bunch of different implementations. So you've actually got that opportunity to see how AWS are thinking about these things. Again, two forms of documentation, still not enough, in my opinion. If you fail with those, then actually you want internet search. Again, this is DuckDuckGo MCP server. This one is free, no API key. Other internet searches are available, but for me, I just want to prioritize. I don't want to be handling a bunch of API keys and limits and all that sort of stuff. So this is prioritizing a fully local setup that has absolutely minimal like effort to get going. And so yeah, this just allows this. And you can see here, this is UVX. So like PipX or NPX, you can just install this from PyPI as a server, and it just goes. Cool. So as Amy pointed out, there's this going straight to the solution doesn't necessarily always give you the best response. So having some sort of systematic way of breaking down things into do's, tasks, questioning them is really useful. I was lazy, I didn't write my own. I just found one. It seems to work okay. It gives us a slightly better quality of answer by effectively quadrupling the number of LLM calls. So things go a bit more slowly, but they tend to be a little bit more accurate, and that's often a trade-off that you're sort of happy to make. If you're working with LLM calls, you're already talking seconds rather than milliseconds, unless you're just doing small autocomplete. So this tends to be okay. One thing to mention here is this MCP server can explode the context. So because it's doing lots of thinking over and over again, and 4 or 5xing the number of calls, when I set this up with AWS Bedrock, I had to change some of the Bedrock settings. I've removed that here because initially I was just like, actually, no one's really interested in Bedrock specific settings. They're in the slide deck if you need them. But I wanted this like fully local piece that worked. Okay, cool. So we've got like a really capable agent. Desktop Commander, I would say, is sort of the nuclear option. This actually gets you probably like 90% of Claude Code's features. It does running commands, it does like local files, it does making edits, all that sort of stuff. Really powerful, really dangerous. Like, use with caution. This is actually making edits in your file system, so you can set up its settings to limit it, and you probably want to do that. You can play around a little bit, but make sure you've got Git. If you allow it to run commands, it can run Git. So that's terrible also, because it can wipe everything. So this is probably the most dangerous one. I wouldn't recommend this for production or it's certainly not on client code bases. But for side projects, it's quite interesting. And yeah, you can again, like I said, configure it with settings to make it more constrained and a little bit more safe. ideally you'd run this entirely sandboxed, but bit beyond the scope of this talk. Cool. So yeah, what did I learn? Again, you'll see some talks online. MCP is pretty much almost all you need. You can go really, really far and fast with the things that are available. Current information is crucial. Like if you're just relying on what the LLM was trained on, especially if you're in, I mean, Python and JavaScript, you're probably okay. Like slightly more obscure languages, you're going to miss out on all the most current up-to-date information. I still have the issue where, like, even with Python, it's always giving me Python 3.8 kind of stuff, different typing, etc. So current information, getting that, enabling it to get that is really useful. Structured thinking, despite the reasoning models, still adds a fair bit here, even though it has a cost associated and a trade-off in terms of latency. And yeah, context is king. So again, the more context that you can give your coding agent, the better. And yeah, I have some extensions and exercises for the reader. If anyone has followed along, is interested, wants to try this out themselves. So there's a couple of things I'd explore, having a look. So number one would be Terminal Bench. This is a benchmark built by Warp Terminal, and this will allow you to run against Claude Code itself and see where you sort of stack up against the big boys, and would be probably quite useful. I think it's also got tools for turning any code base into a gem. So yeah, pretty cool in terms of like you can see like diffs and commits and turn that into an evaluation data set. Yeah, fully explore AWS's MCPs. There's a bunch of them. Yeah, like be interesting to see which ones work well, which ones don't. You can actually just turn this. So this to CLI method, they actually have a bunch of other methods like that. So to AGUI, which is a really, really new framework, but allows you to basically, it's more focused on the interaction with the front end, whereas MCP is sort of the interaction with tools and like prompts and other bits and pieces. This AGUI is more around building user interfaces, as the name suggests. So this exact same agent, rather than the .to CLI, you can do .to AGUI, and then you can attach a front end to it. So you could make exactly the same user interface as Claude Desktop, or some other interface, whatever you want. And yeah, again, like the to CLI method, it's a bit rough and ready, like making it a really slick, beautiful terminal user interface like the other things, is also, yeah, would be really cool. It's something the Pydantic team want to do. So I think at some point there will be a to-TUI method, and yeah, probably using textual. There's already a couple of examples, and Toad is from the textual founder. So yeah, good example of that terminal user interface. But yeah, I suppose in summary, the best way to predict your future is to create it. So yeah, for me, these coding tools are really cool. They're really dangerous. The best way of understanding them for me is to pick them apart, play around with them, get going, and yeah, actually create them. So yeah, that's my call to arms, is that yeah, everyone should give this a go. I've got a very long demo actually, but while I'm playing this, maybe we can go to questions and yeah, start doing a bit more. So this is Otel TUI here. This is just all the logging from all the MCPs being set up. Yep. And yeah, I've added some questions here. This, like I said, it's not a beautiful CLI interface. It's just out of the box. I think it's going to do that. Yeah, here's the plan. So, it's making a plan. It's going through this sort of stuff. Again, this takes a bit of time, but we can start seeing these traces coming through. Yeah. Right. Let's go to the questions. Uh, bu- 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 bu.
I see there's one question. Could you replace desktop Commander with terminal access?
Is there an MCP terminal access? Yeah, then yeah, 100%. Like my uh my feedback would be yeah, that's kind of the point of this, is how pluggable and playable um these things are. Actually, because you can just go in and add an MCP really quickly. Again, take a bit of a look at it. Don't just install any MCP, but you should be, I think, having a look and playing and changing around with these, bringing them in, bringing them out as they get uh, changed and improved. This is what I was talking around with the Gemini stuff. This is probably a bit of overkill. I'm using like Pydantic settings and a validator to use 1Password to get my credentials. It had a little bit of caching because I kept having to authorize with 1Password. But yeah, no, I would say like 100% replace Desktop Commander with terminal access. That would be absolutely the way to do it. And benchmark them, see which one works better, see which behavior you prefer. I think that's the thing for me. And you can see, I love NeoVim. I think one of the things about this is if you use something off the shelf, you're really stuck with how someone else thinks about coding, how someone else thinks about other things. It's actually really simple to get something going that kind of works. Add your own tools, like really specific things for your own code base. So, for example, with the sub process, you can give it access to any like CLI that you've got, right? And you can actually start to like, we've got our own um, SDK that we're building for the client, and you can then just start to use those as tools, or you could even turn it into an MCP server and have like it run the commands that you're building in code and things like that. So it's really the point is, if you see how this is doable, and I don't know if I can show the whole. I mean, I can just um, go here and show sort of my setup. We're really only talking, it's 100 lines of code, but actually, like, that's just because it's packed down. Like, it's really, I mean, this setting stuff, it's 22 lines. It doesn't even need to be anything. I created my own Jira CLI, which just wraps the Jira the Jira CLI, which means that I can basically say, hey, what tickets are assigned to me, what's going on. Yeah, I created my own MCP server here for Python tools, which allows just like linting, running all those sorts of bits and pieces that you want to do. So yeah, you can just completely do this yourself, and however you want it to look, you can get going.